They expected the dogs to return with blood on their jaws. At Thornhill, that was how the story always ended. 3 black shapes boiling out of the tree line, the overseer grinning, the men crowding the yard with lanterns lifted, and on the ground some torn scrap that proved the lesson to anyone thinking of running. But this time the lesson came back wrong. Brutus, Caesar, and Nero loped into the yard at daybreak with their ears pinned and their tongues hanging, no triumph in them, no prize between their teeth. They circled once, restless, whining at a scent that clung to their coats like a ghost. The men standing there, men who could laugh at a whipping, took half a step back without meaning to. Even Cyrus Gann, who smiled when he hurt people, felt something tighten behind his ribs. He raised a hand to quiet the dogs and found himself listening for a sound he couldn't name. The sun lifted itself, slow and heavy, over the pines. Somewhere, a crow barked, and the question spread across the yard like breath in winter. What happened out there? To answer it, you have to go back, past that morning, past the shouted orders and the open dog gate, back to a piece of Mississippi most maps forgot on purpose. Thornhill sat behind 2 layers of hiding. First the swamp pond, black, still as a held breath, and then a forest that closed, ranks after every axe blow. The road in was no road, just a wagon track that flooded each spring and baked to ruts by August. The US mail never came. Route agents called it uneconomic mileage. The county sheriff called it none of my trouble, and the bills folded in his pocket explained the rest. Nearest rail spur was 20 miles as the crow flies, which no one did. You went by mule and hoped the weather stayed considerate. What news of the wider world got that far arrived thin and late. Someone's cousin heard something in town. Someone saw a broadsheet months old. Someone swore a soldier's buttons were found by the riverbank. On that patch of earth, rumor had more weight than law, and fear ruled better than paper ever could. Amelia was born into that geography of silence 14 years after Appomattox. The country had written its amendments and argued its cases and congratulated itself on progress. But those words never learned to walk the mud to Thornhill. Her mother died in the trying to deliver her, and the man who might have been called her father had been sold off, on paper, years earlier. A trick done with debt and signatures instead of an auctioneer's chant. A woman named Ruth gathered the child up, wrapped her in the same thin cloth she used to bind her own wrists against winter, and set about the business of keeping her alive. Amelia grew long-limbed and careful. She learned early that the safest way to move through a room was like light through shutters, thin, clean, and unremarked. In the big house, she scrubbed pine floors until her knuckles bled and carried water that bent her spine to a question mark. She learned to make her face small when Thomas Thornhill's boots clicked across the hall, and smaller still when Cyrus's shadow fell over the threshold. At night, Ruth told her stories, whispering so soft, even the walls strained to hear, of soldiers in blue coats, of papers nailed to courthouse doors, of a thing called freedom men had sworn by and died for. It came, Ruth said once, eyes on the window. It came like a storm and went like a storm, and we were left under the same sky. Then Ruth pressed 2 fingers to her own lips. You keep that inside. Words can be a kind of lantern. They show you the path, but they can also show you to the men who don't want you walking. Thornhill himself liked to walk the rows at dusk, hands behind his back as if inspecting troops. He was a man built wide, with a face that had learned to smile for guests and sneer for everyone else. On the days when he drank too much before supper, he would tell anyone listening that his work was charity, food for labor, shelter for loyalty, order against chaos. We are a family here, he would say, and the word family would curdle in the air like milk left in the sundae. Cyrus handled the parts Thornhill preferred not to witness. 9 years as overseer had made him mannered. He tied knots neatly, counted strokes with a bookkeeper's precision, and kept the dogs lean enough to care. He called them by Roman names, as if that made him educated. He fed them raw meat in the evenings and had them sleep in earshot of the quarters. Around Thornhill, other plantations had shifted into something else, tenant plots, sharecropped pieces, tangled debt agreements that wrapped around a man's ankle like a chain he could not see. But even where labor wore the mask of wages, the old power found new instruments: crop liens, vagrancy laws, apprenticeship papers for orphaned children. The end of war had not ended the appetite of men used to owning other men. Thornhill went further. He built a wall out of lies and distance and put people inside it. Tell a person the sun rises in the west and whip him for disagreeing, and in time he may never look east again. Amelia learned her letters on flour sacks. Marcus, who would not step into her life until later, was not there to teach her yet. The marks she made were her own private rebellion. Ruth traced an A with a damp finger and called it a ladder. "So you can climb out," she said, half joking and half not. Somewhere in Amelia a stubborn pilot light took. When she carried Slop out to the hogs at dawn and the mist lay low across the field, she could see, just for a second, the farm as Ruth described the world beyond it. Roads going somewhere. People who said your name without counting what they could take from you in the saying. The real arithmetic of Thornhill was kept on pages hidden in Thornhill's desk and in scars on people's backs. Counting was for men like him, but there was another tally being kept at night in whispers who had tried to go, who had been brought back, who had simply stopped waking up. In the ledger of memory, the numbers never balanced. October rolled over the land like a slow drum. The first cool nights came, sharp enough to make breath visible. The harvest rose, waited for hands. On the 14th day of that month, the moon was a paring knife in the sky. The air smelled of smoke and wet leaves. Amelia had been thinking for weeks, and thinking had turned into a plan so small it could hide in the seam of a dress. She had no food to carry, or a blanket to spare, or shoes to steal that would not betray her absence by dawn. What she had was direction, east to the river, if Ruth had remembered right. But Ruth had also said, the river draws men like a bell draws dogs. Amelia considered that, and folded it away. The important thing was not the path, but the choosing. She worked until the house slept. She waited until the floorboards stopped speaking. She lay there another hour, listening to her own heart chisel at her ribs. Fear gave her a dozen reasons to stay. The dogs, the swamp, the certainty of pain if she failed, the uncertainty of everything if she did not. But there is a kind of fear that points like a compass. It says, "This is the door the lie is guarding." She rose, light as a shadow uncoupled from its body, and moved. Outside, the dark had weight. It pressed against her eyes and filled her mouth. She slipped along the edge of the kitchen garden, past the smokehouse that always smelled a little of salt and a little of iron, past the line where the packed yard gave up and the grass took over. Her feet found their old places among roots she had once tripped over as a child. She had mapped them with pain then. Now the map served her. Behind her, a lantern flared just one, briefly, and went dark. She froze, joined the nearest tree, and did not breathe until the night relaxed again. At the dog pen the shapes shifted. Brutus lifted his head, tested the air, huffed. Amelia bent, scooped a double handful of damp earth, and rubbed it up her arms and along her neck. She did not know the science of scent cones or how water carried molecules away. She knew what Ruth had said, mud becomes a friend in the woods. She did not head east. She cut north first, counting steps in her head like stitches, then east by degrees, drifting, never making a straight line that a man could follow. In the quarters, a woman woke and went to the yard, her eyes cloudy with sleep. She saw the emptiness where a girl's pallet should be. Fear reached up and pressed her voice flat. She went to Cyrus. In the pen the hinges squealed once, and then were careful. 3 dark bodies poured into the trees like spilled ink. By then, Amelia was a mile away, and widening that mile with each breath. Her feet found briars and learned to step through them. The night learned her shape and let her pass. She did not let herself imagine morning. Morning belonged to people who planned breakfast. She was still inside night, and night was a test. Behind her, somewhere out of sight, a man smiled and said, "Find her." The dogs lowered their heads and ran. It is a small thing in the face of 3 trained beasts and a county's worth of power to say, "I choose." It does not stop the dogs. It does not bribe the sheriff or move the creek. But it moves something in the person who says it, and sometimes that is the hinge upon which a door opens. In the dark, barefoot and hungry, with more world against her than for her, Amelia stepped through. The night did not have stars, only the pulse of her own heartbeat and the sound of breath tearing through her throat. Each stride split the silence like fabric. Behind her, the dogs began to sing. At first, it was only one bark, sharp, distant, uncertain. Then another joined it, then another, until it became a sound older than speech itself, the sound every runaway had feared since before the war, the music of pursuit. Ruth once told her that dogs could smell sin, that they remembered every human lie in the earth. Amelia didn't know if that was true, but she knew they were closer. She ran harder. Branches clawed her face. A thorn tore open the thin skin across her heel. She didn't stop. The forest pressed tighter around her. The trees seemed to lean in, trying to catch her, to warn her maybe, but there was no turning back. The air smelled of rain and rot. The moon had gone behind clouds, and the darkness felt alive. When she finally stumbled into the creek bed, she fell to her knees. The water bit into her skin, cold enough to steal her breath. Ruth had said once, "Water confuses the scent. When the hounds can't find the air, they lose their courage." Amelia didn't know if courage was something dogs could lose, but she had no better plan. She slid into the creek. The current caught her immediately, dragging her downstream. Her dress ballooned around her legs like a ghost trying to pull her under. She kicked and gasped, managed to grab a branch jutting from the bank, and clung there, shivering. The water wrapped around her like ice. Above her, the barking grew louder. The dogs had reached the bank. She could hear their claws clicking against the rocks, their growls muffled by the sound of the water. Then she saw them, 3 dark shapes outlined by the weak silver of moonlight. They paced back and forth, heads low, tails stiff, confused. She sank deeper, until the water touched her chin. Her teeth chattered, but she stayed silent. The current tugged at her, urging her to move. The dogs barked again, short, frustrated bursts. Then they waded into the creek. Panic slammed through her like a fist. She let go of the branch and let the current take her. The water pulled her downstream, faster now. She couldn't tell which way was east anymore. Her body hit stones, roots, driftwood. Pain became rhythm. Somewhere behind her, one of the dogs howled a long, furious sound that sliced the dark. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded hungry. She didn't know how long the river carried her. Time dissolved. At some point, she hit a sandbar, crawled out, and collapsed on the muddy bank. Her skin burned with cold. The soles of her feet were bleeding. For a few precious minutes, there was nothing but her heartbeat and the sigh of the water. Then came the sound she feared most, the low, deliberate barking again, far but not far enough. The dogs had picked up the trail. She forced herself up. Every muscle screamed. The wet dress clung to her skin like another set of chains. Still, she ran. The woods ahead opened slightly, revealing the faint outline of an old fence, half swallowed by vines. On the other side was something that looked like a structure, a roof slanted to one side, walls caved in, but still standing. A cabin. She stumbled toward it. The ground was uneven, riddled with roots and stones. When she reached the door, she pushed it open. It groaned, nearly fell off its hinges, and she slipped inside. The smell hit her first. Mold, dust, rot, and something else, something sweet, like old decay. She didn't care. She closed the door and pressed her back against it. The barking was closer now. She looked around. The cabin was nearly empty. A single chair, broken, a pile of dry leaves in one corner, holes in the floorboards where the ground showed through. The air was thick with the smell of things long dead. Her breathing came too loud. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She could hear the dogs outside now, snuffling, circling, claws scratching against the wooden walls. A growl rolled through the boards beneath her feet. They had found the gap under the cabin. They were testing the wood. Amelia crawled into the farthest corner, behind the broken chair. She pressed herself into a ball, eyes squeezed shut. She prayed not with words, but with the desperate silence of someone who has nothing left to offer. The first crash came like thunder. Wood splintered. The door slammed inward, ripped from its hinge. 3 shapes filled the frame, shadows with teeth. Brutus first, massive, black, eyes like coals. Then Caesar, smaller but quicker. Nero last, his muzzle already flecked with foam. Amelia screamed and threw her arms up. Brutus lunged, and then the world dropped out from under her. The floor gave way. She fell. The air tore past her. The impact knocked the sound from her body. She hit something soft, rolled, gasped, and landed in thick darkness. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she was alive. Her ears rang. Her lungs burned. The barking thundered above, but distant now. She touched the ground, damp, cold, uneven. A cellar. She tried to stand, her legs trembling. The ceiling above was broken where she had fallen through. Jagged boards framed a square of faint grey light. Brutus barked, furious. His claws scraped at the edges of the hole. Caesar and Nero joined him. Their teeth snapped in frustration. They couldn't fit through. She pressed herself against the dirt wall. every muscle shivering. Her bare feet ached, raw and cut. She could taste blood in her mouth. The dogs didn't leave. For hours, they barked and clawed, enraged that their prey had vanished into the earth. The noise filled the cellar until it became the only sound that existed. When they finally went silent, it was worse. Silence meant thought. Silence meant men would come next. She crouched there in the dark, eyes wide though there was nothing to see. The air was thick and wet, and she could hear the small sounds of earth shifting, the whisper of worms, the drip of unseen water. Her stomach cramped with hunger. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She whispered to herself, "If I stop moving, I'll die." But there was nowhere to move to. Then, sometime near dawn, though time had lost its meaning, she heard something new, a sound soft as a sigh from above. "Girl." The voice was hoarse, low, female, old. She froze. "Girl, you down there?" Amelia didn't answer. It could be a trick. It could be Cyrus himself, mocking her in a woman's voice. The voice came again, steadier. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Them dogs are gone. You can come up now." Her throat was dry as ash. "Who are you?" she whispered. A pause. Then, "Someone who ain't supposed to be here neither." She waited. The silence stretched. "Come on up," the voice said. "I got water." Water. She looked up through the jagged hole. Faint light touched the edges now. Slowly, cautiously, she found a piece of broken beam sticking from the dirt wall and pulled herself upward. Her arms shook with the effort. When her head rose to floor level, she saw her. An old black woman, hair silver as moonlight, face mapped with years. She was kneeling by the hole, holding out a tin cup. "Drink," the woman said. Amelia reached out with trembling hands. The cup was warm, the water inside slightly bitter with minerals. It tasted like life. When she finished, she whispered, "Where did the dogs go?" The woman's mouth curled not into a smile, but something older. "I sent them away." "How?" "Same way I send everything that comes looking for me. I know things that scare dogs, things that scare men too." Amelia stared. "Who are you?" "My name's Esther," the woman said quietly. "Been living in these woods near 40 years. The morning light pushed through the holes in the cabin roof, turning the dust into drifting gold. Esther looked toward the trees and said, "They'll be coming soon. Best you rest while you can, girl. Sun's gonna bring trouble." Amelia's body finally gave in. She sank to the floor. Her eyes closed before she could speak another word. Outside, far through the pines, the dogs began to bark again, not with rage this time, but confusion. Their master was calling them home. And somewhere deep inside that ruined cabin, two women who were never meant to meet had just changed the ending of a story that had always been written in blood. The light that woke Amelia was weak and grey, leaking through cracks in the cabin wall. The first thing she felt was pain sharp in her feet, dull in her shoulders, a throbbing in her temples like a heartbeat made of knives. The second thing she felt was warmth. A small fire burned in the corner, smoke curling upward and vanishing through the broken roof. Esther was crouched beside it, her hands busy over a tin pot. The smell of boiled roots filled the air. She looked up as Amelia stirred. "You're awake," she said simply. "Good. Thought maybe I lost you to the night." Amelia tried to sit, but her body protested. Esther moved to her side, steady and calm, and pressed her back down. "Don't fight it. You ran hard. Your body's been keeping score." Amelia's throat was dry, her lips cracked. "Where am I?" "A place the world forgot," Esther said. "And that's why we're still breathing." Amelia blinked, trying to remember. The dogs, the fall, the voice. All of it felt like a fever dream. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Esther didn't answer right away. She poured something from the pot into a small wooden bowl and held it out. "Drink this first, then we talk." Amelia took it with trembling hands. The liquid was bitter, earthy. It made her tongue burn slightly, but warmth spread through her chest. She didn't realize until then how cold she'd been. "Who are you?" she asked again. "I told you, Esther. Been living out here since before you were born. Maybe before your mama was, too. You live here alone." "Ain't alone if you know how to listen," Esther said, stirring the pot again. "The woods got more voices than people ever had. Some of them kind, some of them hungry. You learn which is which, you live longer." Amelia looked around. The cabin that had seemed ruined in the dark now looked less like a ruin and more like a shelter that refused to die. Dried herbs hung from the beams, bundles of sage, cedar, strange leaves she didn't recognize. Symbols carved into the wood framed the door, circles and spirals burned deep by knife or fire. "What are those marks?" Amelia asked. "Old things," Esther said softly. "From before our people could write. They keep away what ain't welcome. Men, beasts, spirits, it don't much matter. Fear listens to certain shapes." Amelia stared. "You scared the dogs away." Esther gave a small laugh. "I didn't scare them. I reminded them there are places even they ain't meant to step." She leaned closer, voice dropping. "You saw how they turned back. That ain't nature. That's knowledge. My grandmother called it root work. Her grandmother called it survival." Amelia wanted to ask more, but Esther cut her off with a look. "The less you know, the safer you are. All that matters is you're still breathing. Now we got to think what comes next." Outside, a crow screamed once and went quiet. Esther froze, listening. Then she nodded to herself. "They'll be here soon. Men don't like losing what they think they own. They'll come looking, and they'll come angry." Amelia's pulse quickened. "What do we do?" "We don't do nothing yet," Esther said. "You can barely stand, but when the time comes, you keep your head low and your eyes open. I'll handle the rest." She moved toward the door, lifted the old knife from beside the fire, and looked out through a crack in the wall. Amelia's fear returned. "They'll kill you if they find you." Esther's voice was almost gentle. "Child, if they could have done that, they would have done it 40 years ago. Let 'em come." The hours stretched. Amelia dozed and woke again. Once she thought she heard singing a low hum that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves. Esther sat cross-legged near the fire, eyes closed, rocking slightly. The tune had no words, just rhythm. The air seemed to thicken around her, heavy with scent, smoke, herbs, something sharp like iron. Then, from the distance, came the sound of hooves. Amelia tensed. Esther opened her eyes. "Time," she murmured. The hooves grew louder, joined by men's voices and the distant bark of dogs. Torches flickered through the trees outside, weaving like angry fireflies. Amelia crawled closer to the corner. "They're here." "Stay down," Esther said. A shout came from outside. "Cabin ahead." Another voice, Cyrus's, followed, unmistakable in its lazy cruelty. "Bring the torches. Check the place." The door rattled once under a boot, then again. Esther stood perfectly still. "Anyone in there?" Cyrus called. Esther's voice came calm, almost bored. "Ain't nothing here but old bones and dust." Cyrus laughed. "We'll see about that." He kicked the door open. Light from the torches poured in, orange and violent. The smoke from the fire twisted in the glow, filling the cabin with haze. Cyrus stepped inside, rifle in hand. Behind him, 2 other men waited. Esther didn't move. She stood in the center of the room like a statue carved from shadow. Cyrus squinted. "You live here? Been here long as the trees have," Esther said. "You seen a girl? About this tall, dark skin, maybe bloody?" Esther tilted her head. "You asking 'cause you lost her, or 'cause you miss her?" Cyrus scowled. "Don't play games with me, old woman." "I ain't playin'. Ain't no girl here. Just me and the ghosts." He stepped closer. The dogs behind him whined, uneasy. Brutus barked once, then backed away, tail down. Cyrus glanced back at them, irritated. "What's wrong with them?" Esther smiled faintly. "They got good sense." The men shifted nervously. The smell of the herbs filled the room stronger now, thick enough to make their eyes water. Cyrus raised his rifle, pointing it at her chest. "If I find out you're lying..." Esther cut him off. "Lying don't make truth disappear, boy. It just waits till you're foolish enough to meet it." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the fire crackling. Then one of the men muttered, "Cyrus, she's right. There ain't nobody here. Let's go." Cyrus's jaw worked, but he didn't pull the trigger. Finally, he spat on the floor. "If I find out you helped her, I'll come back, and I won't be kind." "You ain't kind now," Esther said softly. He turned, muttering a curse, and motioned for the others. The dogs growled once more before retreating into the trees. The sound of hooves and footsteps faded into the distance. When the silence returned, Esther stood very still for a long moment. Then she turned back to Amelia's hiding place and whispered, "Come on out." Amelia crawled from beneath the broken boards, shaking. They believed you?" "For now." Esther knelt and began to gather her things. "But they'll be back, always are." "What do we do now?" "You run again," Esther said. But this time, you run smart. She went to the corner, pulled up a loose plank, and took out a small sack. Inside were dried meat, a hard loaf of bread, and a tin of water. She handed it to Amelia. 2 days' worth if you're careful. You'll need to head north, not east. East'll get you caught. North? Amelia repeated. Ruth said the river. They'll be waiting at the river. Always are. But north, there's a place, a settlement, free people. They take in runaways, travelers, anybody who needs a new name. Amelia hesitated. 4 days, maybe 5 if you move slow, Esther said. But you got to move, before the sun sets again. Amelia looked down at her feet. Esther saw the blood and sighed. She tore strips from an old blanket and began to wrap them. The cloth was rough but clean. Why are you helping me? Amelia asked quietly. Esther tied the last knot and sat back. Because somebody helped me once, long time ago. You pay that kind of debt forward, or it rots inside you. She stood and went to the door. They'll come again. I can feel it. Go now. Amelia rose unsteadily. What about you? I'll be fine. Esther smiled for the first time, small, sad, but real. I always am. Amelia stopped in the doorway. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you make it. Amelia stepped out into the pale morning. The woods smelled of wet pine and smoke. For a moment, she looked back. Esther was standing in the doorway, a figure framed by the dying firelight. Then the old woman turned away, closed the door, and the cabin disappeared behind the trees. The forest swallowed Amelia again. Ahead lay miles of swamp and hunger and pain, but also something else she'd never known before. Choice. The morning light was thin and colorless, the kind that made the world look unfinished. Amelia's bare feet whispered over the damp leaves as she moved north, just as Esther had said. She carried the small sack tight against her chest, afraid it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Each step sent pain crawling up her legs, but the promise of distance was stronger than pain. The air was heavy with the smell of earth and the slow rot of autumn. Insects hummed like tiny, tireless engines. Crows barked somewhere above her. The forest here was different, older, denser. The trees grew so close together that even the light had trouble finding its way through. She stopped once to drink from a stream. The water was clean and cold, but the chill cut through her body. She could still feel Esther's hands wrapping her feet, the old woman's voice saying, "Asterisk, you run smart this time. Asterisk." Esther had marked a path for her, a faint trail of notches carved into the bark of trees. Some were fresh, some so old they'd half-healed, proof that Esther had used this road many times before. The thought gave Amelia strength. She wasn't the first. Maybe she wouldn't be the last. But freedom, she was learning, didn't taste sweet. It tasted like sweat, mud, and fear. By midday, her stomach was a knot of hunger. She sat under a fallen tree, opened the sack, and tore a piece from the hard bread. It was rough, dry, but the chew reminded her she was alive. She thought of Ruth, how she used to steal bits of bread crust and save them for Amelia as a child. How she would whisper, "Asterisk, eat slow, it lasts longer. Asterisk." Amelia ate slow. The forest was quiet except for the faint hiss of wind through branches. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A creak, faint, rhythmic, like footsteps on wood. She froze, heart hammering. Voices, 2 of them, low and distant, male. She dropped the bread and ducked behind the fallen log. The voices came closer. "I'm telling you," Cyrus said, "she came this way. Dogs lost her scent. Ain't no girl out here. You don't lose a scent that strong unless something strange is going on. That old witch." The rest was swallowed by distance. Amelia pressed her hand over her mouth, breathing through her fingers. The footsteps grew softer, then faded altogether. She waited another 5 minutes before daring to move. When she finally stood, the forest felt heavier, listening. She didn't know if Esther was still alive. The thought cut at her like a thorn. The woman had faced Cyrus without flinching. Amelia wanted to believe she was too strong to be caught, but she had seen too much death to trust hope blindly. She whispered a promise into the trees. "Asterisk, I'll make it. I'll live. For both of us. Asterisk." Then she started walking again. By afternoon, the ground changed. The earth became soft, spongy, and the air turned wet. A sour smell rose from the soil, stagnant water, and things long decayed. She had reached the edge of the swamp. It stretched before her like an endless black mirror. Trees rose straight from the water, their roots tangled and gnarled. Spanish moss hung from their branches like the hair of drowned ghosts. Esther's voice came back to her. Asterisk. 4 days if you move fast, 5 if you don't. Asterisk. But there was no way around the swamp that wouldn't cost days she didn't have. The men would circle, the dogs would heal their fear, so she stepped forward. The first plunge was a shock. The water rose to her knees, then her waist. The mud beneath was thick and greedy. Every step sucked at her feet, as though the earth itself was trying to keep her. She waded forward, one slow step at a time. Her breath came ragged. The swamp gurgled and sighed, alive in its own strange way. A dragonfly landed on her shoulder, its wings shimmering like glass. She wanted to take it as a good sign. Somewhere ahead, something splashed. She froze. The water rippled outward in slow, widening rings. Gators, she thought. Esther had warned her. Asterisk. They ain't evil, just hungry. You keep quiet and keep moving. Asterisk. She kept moving. Hours passed, or maybe it was only one. Time meant nothing here. The sun was hidden behind the grey canopy, and the world had only 2 colors, black and green. At one point, she tripped on a submerged root and went under. The swamp filled her mouth, bitter and foul. She fought her way up, gasping, wiping mud from her eyes. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would break through her ribs. When she finally saw solid ground ahead, a rise of dry land scattered with cypress knees, she nearly cried. She dragged herself out of the water, crawled a few feet, and collapsed. Her whole body trembled. She lay there, staring at the sky, which had finally begun to show a little blue through the branches. She was alive, but barely. She wanted to sleep right there, to let the earth swallow her whole. But a memory cut through the fog. Esther's voice. Asterisk. You rest, then you keep running. Asterisk. So she rested. By evening, the world began to darken again. Crickets started their song, and somewhere, a whippoorwill called. Amelia forced herself to her feet. Every muscle in her body protested. She walked until the stars came out, small, trembling lights that looked like they could go out at any moment. She followed them, though she didn't know which was north anymore. Then she heard it, a crack of a twig. She spun, heart leaping. A man stepped out from behind a tree. He was tall, dark-skinned, with a rough beard and eyes that looked both kind and wary. A rifle hung over his shoulder. Amelia stumbled backward. Stay away. He raised his hand slowly. Easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you. Who are you? Name's Marcus, he said. You running? She didn't answer. Her body was shaking too hard. He looked at her, really looked, and his expression softened. Yeah, you're running, I can tell. He lowered the rifle, set it against a tree, and crouched a few feet away. You look half dead. Sit. I got food. She hesitated, then sank to the ground. He opened a small cloth bundle and handed her a strip of dried fish. The smell made her stomach twist with hunger. She ate in silence. The salt burned her lips but steadied her heart. Where you from? He asked. Thornhill Plantation. Marcus's head snapped up. Thornhill, that place still running. They never stopped. Her voice cracked. Nobody told us. Marcus looked away, anger tightening his jaw. 30 years and they still, he broke off. We'll tell someone. When we reach the settlement, they'll have to listen. Amelia shook her head. They won't. Nobody ever listens. Marcus met her eyes. They will, because I'll make them. The certainty in his voice startled her. It was the first time anyone had spoken about making times the world listen, instead of begging it to. They sat in silence a while longer. The swamp murmured behind them, endless and alive. Finally, Marcus said, We rest here tonight. Move at first light. I'll keep watch. I can't sleep, Amelia whispered. Then we'll stay awake together. He stoked a tiny fire small enough to hide its light beneath the fallen branches, and they sat beside it. The flames flickered over their faces, painting the air in shades of gold and shadow. Amelia stared into the fire, her thoughts circling Ruth, Esther, and the 42 souls still trapped on Thornhill soil. For the first time, she realized that freedom was not just escape, it was return. Because someone had to go back, someone had to tell. The night stretched long and silent, the air thick with smoke and resolve. Far away, in a cabin swallowed by the woods, Esther sat alone with her knife across her lap. She could feel the change in the wind, the ripple of a story beginning to turn. Run, girl, she murmured into the dark. and don't stop till the truth finds daylight. Dawn came without color. The world looked washed out, as if the sun had forgotten how to shine. A pale mist clung to the ground, wrapping the forest in silence. Amelia blinked against the light filtering through the trees. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Marcus crouched by the ashes of their small fire, eyes scanning the woods. He turned when she stirred. "You made it through the night," he said quietly. Amelia nodded, stretching her stiff limbs. The ache in her body had dulled to something bearable. Her feet were swollen and bleeding through the cloth wrappings Esther had made, but they still carried her. "Eat," Marcus said, handing her the last piece of dried fish. "We'll move soon." She chewed slowly, tasting salt and smoke. "How far to the settlement?" 3 days if we keep steady." He paused. "Less if we're lucky." "Are we lucky?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus's smile was quick and dry. "We're still breathing, ain't we?" They moved together through the forest, the quiet rhythm of their steps becoming its own kind of prayer. The path narrowed, winding between trees that grew closer and thicker, as if guarding a secret. The air grew heavy again, humid, heavy with the smell of moss and old water. The ground beneath their feet was soft, the kind that kept footprints for a long time. Every so often, Marcus would stop and listen. He seemed to read the forest the way others read a page. He would glance at broken branches or the pattern of leaves, then nod for her to follow. "Did you run from Thornhill alone?" he asked after an hour. "Yes. Anybody else ever tried?" She hesitated. "A few. None made it far. The dogs," her voice trailed off. He didn't press her. "I know. I've seen what those hounds can do." Amelia looked up at him. "You've run before?" "Twice," he said. "First time, I was caught. Second time, I didn't look back." "What happened the first time?" "They broke my ribs, put me in a shed for a week, then sold me again, said it was mercy." There was no anger in his voice, just fact. But Amelia could feel the weight of it in the air. They walked in silence for a while after that. When the sun reached its highest point, they came to a clearing where the forest floor dipped into a narrow ravine. A small stream ran at the bottom, winding like a silver snake. Marcus knelt, testing the air. "We'll rest here." Amelia sank down beside him, exhaustion pressing at her bones. The sound of the water soothed her. She closed her eyes and heard something that froze her blood. A dog barking, not close, but not far either. Marcus was already standing. "They found our trail," he said. "How?" "You're bleeding through your wrappings. They're smelling that." Amelia looked down. The cloth around her feet was soaked through with dark patches. Marcus cursed under his breath. "We can't stop now." They followed the ravine, moving fast but low. The ground here was slick with mud, and roots jutted out like traps. The barking grew louder, then was joined by voices. "There, down by the creek." Gunfire cracked. Bark exploded from a nearby tree, stinging Amelia's face. "Keep moving," Marcus shouted. They slid down the bank, splashing through the water. It was cold and shallow, but every splash felt like thunder. "Up the other side," Marcus said. Amelia tried to climb, but the mud gave way beneath her feet. She slipped, fell back, and hit her knee hard. Marcus grabbed her hand and hauled her up. "Come on." They reached the top, panting. The forest ahead was thicker, darker. Behind them, the men were shouting orders. Marcus grabbed her hand. "This way." They ran. The trees blurred past them. Amelia's lungs burned. Her heart felt like it might burst. Another shot. The bullet tore through the branches above them. A splinter cut her cheek. Then, just as suddenly, the woods opened. A clearing, and in the clearing houses. Small, sturdy, smoke curling from chimneys. A woman hanging laundry froze when she saw them. A man dropped the hoe he was holding. Marcus stumbled to a stop. "We made it," he whispered. Amelia stared, too stunned to speak. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. "There, don't let them get away." The settlers saw the armed men burst from the trees, 3 of them, rifles raised. The woman screamed. Before Amelia could move, a voice thundered across the clearing. "That's far enough." An old man stepped out from between 2 houses. He was tall, his beard white, his eyes sharp. He leaned on a cane that looked like it had seen more battles than he had. Marcus gasped. "Samuel." "You know him," Amelia whispered. "Everybody knows Samuel," Marcus said. "He built this place." Samuel walked toward them, slow but steady. "You boys lost?" The lead pursuer raised his gun. Those two are runaways, property of Thornhill Plantation. Samuel's expression didn't change. Ain't no property here, only people, and you're trespassing. This ain't your business, old man, the pursuer snapped. Move aside. Samuel's eyes narrowed. You think we built these homes just to watch you drag children back into chains? The man hesitated, glancing around. More settlers had appeared, men and women with tools, axes, old rifles. They fanned out, forming a silent wall between the pursuers and the fugitives. One of the men behind the leader muttered, "There's too many." The leader spat on the ground. "This ain't over." Samuel nodded. "It is today." The men backed away, slowly at first, then faster, until the forest swallowed them again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Amelia's knees gave out, and she fell to the ground. Marcus knelt beside her. Samuel looked down at them. "Where you from, child?" Amelia tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't work. Marcus answered for her. "Thornhill Plantation." Samuel's face hardened. "That place is still running." "Yes," Marcus said, "and there's more. 40, maybe more still there. They don't even know they're free." Samuel looked toward the forest where the men had vanished. "Not for long," he said, "not if I got breath left." He turned to the others. "Get them water, food, and fetch the marshal." As the crowd moved to obey, Amelia looked up at the old man. "Marshal?" Samuel smiled, grim and certain. "The law, child, the real kind. It's time the law remembered what freedom means." Amelia closed her eyes. The world swayed. For the first time since the night she ran, she let herself believe she might live. But somewhere far behind them, Cyrus Gann was already planning his next move. And the dogs were restless again. The settlement smelled of smoke, iron, and bread. Amelia had almost forgotten what a village sounded like: laughter, the clatter of tools, the soft rhythm of daily life not built on fear. It felt impossible that such a place could exist just a few miles from the nightmare she'd fled. Samuel's people moved quickly. Someone brought a basin of water, another a strip of cloth. Marcus helped Amelia sit on the steps of a small cabin while a woman cleaned her wounds. The sting made her hiss through her teeth. "Easy now," the woman said gently. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt strange, heavy, like something that might break if she believed it too hard. Samuel stood nearby, speaking quietly with two men. His voice carried the weight of command without ever needing to rise. When he turned back to her, the firelight caught the lines in his face. Every wrinkle seemed carved by years of fighting the same battle under different names. "You said Thornhill Plantation," he began. "That name's a ghost. Folks been whispering about it for years, said it never let go of the past. Now I see those whispers had bones." Amelia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They still work the fields, still get whipped. They don't even know what freedom means." Samuel's eyes darkened. "Then we'll teach 'em." He looked to Marcus. "You said the dogs tracked you all the way here?" Marcus nodded grimly. "They'll keep coming, and when they tell Thornhill we made it this far, the master'll send men." Samuel didn't flinch. "Then we'll be ready." He turned to the gathered crowd, men, women, children peering from doorways. "Listen up. We got 3 days, maybe less, before the lawless come try to take back what ain't theirs. But we've been through worse. We'll send word to Jackson tonight." One man frowned. "Marshall won't come, Sam. You know how it goes. Paper promises don't travel this far." Samuel's gaze sharpened. "Then I'll go myself if I have to, but I ain't letting no more children vanish into the dark while we call ourselves free." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The settlement began to move with purpose, men checking rifles, women gathering supplies, the clang of hammers echoing through the cool evening air. Amelia watched, awe mixing with exhaustion. These people had built something that looked small but carried the power of defiance. Samuel crouched down beside her. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we make this right." That night, the settlement barely slept. Marcus stood guard near the edge of the clearing, rifle ready. Amelia sat by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars above seemed sharper here, unafraid to shine. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. "They always come," Marcus said. "But this time, they'll find something waiting." Amelia stared into the flames. "I used to think the world ended at Thornhill's fence. Ruth said freedom was just a word. White men used to keep folks hoping." Marcus looked at her. "You still think that?" She hesitated. "Not anymore. Freedom's real. I just didn't know it could look like this." He smiled faintly. "Freedom looks like work. like fighting for breath every day, but it's still worth it. At dawn, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Samuel was already awake. He stood at the edge of the clearing, hand resting on his cane, eyes narrowed toward the tree line. Dust rose between the pines, 5 riders approaching. Marcus lifted his rifle. "They're early." "Put that down," Samuel said. "Let's see what kind of men we're dealing with." The riders slowed as they entered the clearing. Cyrus Gann was at the front, his grin wide and wolfish. Behind him were 4 armed men, and the same dogs, Brutus, Caesar, and Nero, straining against their leashes. "Well, well," Cyrus drawled. "Look what we found. A thief and a runaway. 2 of them even. You folks harboring stolen property." Samuel stepped forward. "You can turn that horse around. Ain't nothing here belongs to you." Cyrus dismounted, laughing. "You think the law's on your side, old man. The law don't come out here. The law don't care what happens in these woods." Samuel's voice dropped low and steady. "Maybe, but I do." Behind him, a dozen settlers emerged, armed with rifles, hoes, axes, whatever could be used to fight. Cyrus looked around, the grin fading. "You gonna start a war over some field hands?" "No," Samuel said. "We're gonna end one." Cyrus's hand hovered over his revolver. The dogs growled, muscles rippling. The tension thickened like storm air. Then Marcus stepped forward, rifle aimed squarely at Cyrus's chest. "Leave now," Marcus said, "or the next sound you hear'll be your own death rattle." Cyrus's eyes flicked to Amelia. "You think this ends because you ran, girl? You'll never be free. None of you." Amelia's voice was hoarse but firm. "Maybe not, but you won't own anyone again." Cyrus spat, gave a sharp whistle, and turned his horse. "You're digging your own graves," he said as he rode away. The dogs followed reluctantly, whining as they vanished back into the trees. When the noise faded, Samuel turned to Marcus. "He'll be back, next time with more men." Marcus nodded. "Then we bring the marshal faster." Samuel looked at Amelia. "You ready to tell your story to the law?" Her hands trembled, but she nodded. "I'll tell everything. I'll make them see." That afternoon, Samuel and 3 men rode toward the nearest town. They carried letters sealed with wax reports of illegal bondage, the names of witnesses, and the plea for a federal marshal to investigate. Back at the settlement, Amelia watched the road until night fell. Every creak of the forest made her heart jump, but the riders didn't return. Marcus sat beside her, sharpening his knife. "You should rest," he said. "I can't. Not until I know they made it." He looked up. "You ever wonder what you'll do after all this?" Amelia frowned. "After? Yeah, when Thornhill's gone, when they're free." She thought about it. Maybe teach, maybe tell stories. Someone has to remember. Marcus smiled. "You already sound like Ruth." Amelia's eyes softened. She'd laughed to hear that. The fire popped, sending a spiral of sparks into the dark. They sat there together, 2 survivors waiting for justice that might never come but daring to believe it could. And far away, beyond the trees, a courier's horse galloped through the night toward Jackson, carrying the truth in a single sealed envelope that could change everything. By the time Samuel returned, the world had turned the color of rust and ash. 2 days had passed since he rode out, and every hour had stretched like rope pulled too tight. When the sound of hooves finally echoed through the clearing, the entire settlement came out to meet him. Amelia stood at the front, heart pounding. Samuel swung down from his horse, dust streaking his coat, but fire still burning in his eyes. "Well?" Marcus asked. "They listened," Samuel said simply. "Marshal Clayton's on his way." A murmur spread through the crowd, hope mixing with disbelief. Amelia stepped closer. "He's really coming?" Samuel nodded. "He said he's bringing 20 men, all armed and bearing federal badges. He rides by dawn. Thornhill's days are numbered." For the first time since she'd run, Amelia smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. "Then it's over." Samuel looked at her gravely. "Child, it ain't over till the truth stands in the open, where even liars can't deny it. But it's a start." That night, the settlement prepared as if for battle. Marcus cleaned his rifle with the precision of a ritual. Samuel sat with 2 other men, mapping routes and discussing the fastest way back to Thornhill. Amelia sat by the fire, listening. The flames danced across her face, turning her eyes gold. She felt the weight of what was coming, justice and danger mixed together. Marcus looked up from his weapon. "You don't have to go, you know." She frowned. "What do you mean? When the marshal gets here, you could stay. You've done enough. Amelia shook her head. No, I have to go back. They need to see someone came back for them. Marcus studied her, the firelight catching the lines of exhaustion on her face. You're still just a child. She met his gaze. So were they when the whip started. He looked away, ashamed. Then we ride together. The morning came cold and clear. Mist hung over the ground like a veil. Amelia stood by the gate as the first figures appeared down the road. Horses, rifles, badges glinting in the light. Marshal Clayton rode at the front, straight-backed, his coat dark and heavy. His face was pale and hard, carved by years of seeing too much. When he reached the settlement, he dismounted and looked around. His eyes landed on Samuel. You, the one sent word. I am, Samuel said, stepping forward. Name's Samuel Carter. These are the folks of New Hope. You got our message. I did. The marshal's voice was steady, professional, but there was steel in it. You said you have witnesses. Samuel gestured toward Amelia and Marcus. Right here. Marshal Clayton's eyes softened when they fell on the girl. You, from Thornhill. Amelia nodded. Yes, sir. You're the one who ran. Yes, sir. He removed his hat. Then you've done more for justice than most men wearing badges. The crowd fell silent. Marshal Clayton turned to his men. Mount up. We ride now. I'll see the truth of this myself. They left the settlement that morning, a column of riders cutting through the fog like ghosts. Amelia rode beside Marcus, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had never been on a horse before New Hope, but she refused to show fear. The marshal kept a steady pace, the hooves striking rhythm into the earth. Occasionally he asked questions about Thornhill's size, its people, its overseer. Amelia answered as best she could, her voice quiet but sure. They passed through burned-out towns, old battlefields half swallowed by weeds, the bones of a country still healing from its own sins. Every mile felt like walking deeper into history's shadow. As the day stretched on, Marcus pointed to the horizon. There, he said. See that white roof through the trees? That's Thornhill. Amelia's throat tightened. The plantation looked unchanged, arrogant and still, as if time had never dared touch it. Marshal Clayton raised his hand, signaling his men to slow. We approach on foot from here. Spread out. No one fires unless I give the word. They dismounted quietly. The sound of birds vanished. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Amelia's heart was a hammer inside her chest. Every step toward the big house felt heavier. The smell of smoke and soil was exactly the same as she remembered. She could almost hear Ruth humming somewhere in the quarters, almost feel the sting of the overseer's whip echo through the air. The men took position, half circling the house, half watching the fields. Marshal Clayton motioned for Amelia and Marcus to stay behind him. Thomas Thornhill appeared on the porch, his white suit pressed, his hair silver at the temples. He held a glass of whiskey like a man certain of his own safety. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called, his voice smooth, practiced. "I'm Federal Marshal Clayton," the marshal said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "I'm here to investigate reports of unlawful servitude and murder committed on this property." Thornhill laughed. "You must be mistaken. Everyone here works of their own free will. We're a family." The words made Amelia flinch. The marshal's gaze was unflinching. "Then you won't mind if I speak to them myself?" "Of course not," Thornhill said with a smile, "but you'll be wasting your time. My people are loyal." Behind him, Cyrus Gann stepped into view, rifle slung over his shoulder. The dogs stood beside him, hackles raised. The air thickened. The deputies lifted their rifles. Thornhill's smile didn't fade. "You're trespassing, Marshal." "I'm enforcing the law," Clayton replied coldly. He turned toward the cabins. "Everyone out," he called. "I need to speak to you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first door creaked open. Then another. The people emerged slowly, men, women, children, all barefoot, all staring with wide, uncertain eyes. They looked at the marshal, then at Thornhill, unsure which man held their fate. Clayton raised his voice. "Are you being held here against your will?" Silence. The only sound was the creak of leather and the faint wind stirring the grass. Thornhill smiled wider. "You see, they're free. They choose to stay." Then Amelia stepped forward. "They're scared," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "They won't speak, because they know what happens when they tell the truth." All eyes turned to her. Amelia walked past the marshal, toward the crowd. Her bare feet sank into the dirt that had once cut her skin. She saw Ruth older, thinner, her eyes hollow. Their gazes met, and time seemed to stop. "Miss Ruth," Amelia whispered. The old woman's lips trembled. "Child, it's me." Ruth covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "You came back." Amelia turned to the marshal. "These people have been slaves all their lives. Thornhill told us the war never ended. He told us we were property. He killed anyone who said otherwise." The crowd shifted. Fear began to crack. Thornhill's voice thundered. "Lies." "If it's lies," Amelia said, "then why did you send dogs after me? Why do they all carry scars from your whip?" She turned to Ruth. "Show him." Ruth hesitated. Then slowly, with trembling hands, she lifted the back of her shirt. The scars spoke louder than any words ever could. Marshal Clayton's face hardened. One by one, others turned backs marked with raised lines, proof carved into flesh. Clayton faced Thornhill. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, murder, and violation of the 13th Amendment." The overseer reached for his rifle. A deputy was faster. The crack of the gun echoed through the valley. Cyrus dropped to the porch, his weapon falling from his hands. Thornhill stumbled backward, whiskey spilling across his coat. "You can't do this. This is my land." "No," Clayton said. "It belongs to them now." He nodded to his men. "Take him." Thornhill fought, shouted, but the deputies dragged him down the steps in irons. The people watched in stunned silence, as if afraid to breathe too loudly in case it all vanished. Then Ruth began to cry, not softly deep, shaking sobs that broke open the dam in every heart. Amelia reached her and fell into her arms. "You're free," she whispered. "It's over." Ruth held her tighter. "No, child, it's just beginning." The marshal spent 3 days at Thornhill. They took statements, uncovered shallow graves, documented everything. Men who once believed themselves untouchable were led away in chains. For the first time, the air on that land smelled clean. And when the sun set on the 3rd day, it wasn't on a plantation anymore. It was on something being reborn from the ashes of lies. The days that followed were slow, careful, and filled with the kind of silence that comes only after thunder. For the first time in living memory, no overseer's voice cracked the air, no dogs barked, no bell rang to mark the start of labor. Instead, there were questions, soft, uncertain questions asked by people learning to use their voices again. "What happens now?" one man asked the marshal. "Where do we go?" Marshal Clayton, standing in the yard where Thornhill's whip once whistled, took off his hat. "You go where you want," he said. "You're free citizens of the United States of America. You always were. It's just the world took too long to remember." His words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through cloud. Amelia stayed close to Ruth, helping her understand what was happening. Deputies moved through the quarters, writing down names, ages, birthplaces, whatever fragments people remembered. When one of the younger men asked what all that paper meant, Amelia explained as best she could. "It's proof," she said, "so no one can pretend we don't exist again." She could feel Ruth watching her, pride mixing with something heavier, grief for all the years lost. "That voice of yours," Ruth whispered. "You sound like freedom." Amelia smiled faintly. "I sound like you." In the evenings, the marshal met with Samuel and a few of the elders from New Hope. They gathered in Thornhill's grand dining room, now stripped bare of its finery. Maps and documents covered the long table where Thornhill had once dined on stolen labor. Samuel pointed to the map with his thick, calloused finger. "These families can't just scatter. Some will want to stay. It's the only home they know." Clayton nodded. "Then we make it legal. This land can be divided under the Freedmen's Bureau provisions. I'll see to it the court recognizes their claim." "Court," Samuel muttered. That word still sounded mighty far away. "Then we'll bring it closer," Clayton said. His tone was quiet, but Amelia could hear conviction in it. When word of Thornhill's arrest spread, people from neighboring towns began to arrive, some out of curiosity, others out of anger, and a few out of shame. One afternoon, a white farmer rode up the long road, his hat in his hands. He stopped near the gate and stared at the freed men and women working to rebuild the cabins. "My pa used to say Thornhill was the richest man in the county," he said quietly to Samuel. "Never thought to ask why. Guess I know now." Samuel's gaze was hard. "You gonna do something about it, or you just gonna think?" The man swallowed. "I'll tell the others. I'll help if you'll have me." Samuel nodded once. "Then start by listening." Amelia watched the exchange from the steps of the big house. She thought about how the truth didn't just free the people who had been chained, it also exposed the ones who'd looked away. That night, the marshal came to find her. The stars above Thornhill were sharp, cold, and clean. "You did good, Miss Amelia," he said. "I seen grown men go their whole lives without the courage you showed." Amelia didn't know what to say. Praise felt strange, almost heavier than fear. "I just wanted it to stop," she said. He nodded. "That's how most revolutions start." He handed her a folded paper. "My report. It's going to Washington. There'll be trials. Compensation for everyone here." "What's compensation?" she asked. "Money. For the years stolen." Amelia shook her head slowly. "We don't want money. We just want to live like people." The marshal smiled, small and sad. "Then that's the best payment of all." Weeks passed. The big house was emptied. Thornhill's name was stripped from the ledgers. Where once stood a symbol of tyranny, now children ran through the fields without fear. Ruth planted a small garden beside her cabin, collards, beans, and sunflowers. She said the soil finally felt like it belonged to her. Marcus worked with Samuel to build new homes, teaching others carpentry. His hands, once used for someone else's profit, now shaped wood that would shelter free families. And Amelia learned to read properly. Clayton left her a book before he rode away. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but it was hers. Inside, in the marshal's neat handwriting, were the words, "Asterisk, for the girl who made the law remember, asterisk." The trial came 8 months later. Thornhill was brought in shackles to the courthouse in Jackson, his once white suit now the color of old bone. The room was crowded freedmen, settlers, reporters, townsfolk who'd never imagined their world could be turned upside down by a 12-year-old girl. Amelia sat in the witness stand, her voice steady as she told the story again. She spoke of the lies, the whippings, the dogs, the run through the dark, the woman who had saved her, the people who had been left behind. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge's gavel seemed reluctant to break the spell. The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Thornhill's face twisted not with fear, but disbelief. "You can't jail a man for keeping order," he shouted as the guards led him away. No one answered. The newspapers called it Times, "The Thornhill Case, asterisk." Congressmen in Washington read about it, pastors preached about it. But to Amelia, it wasn't history, it was survival written down before the world could forget. The following spring, Thornhill died in prison. Heart failure, the papers said. Cyrus Gann served 12 years and vanished afterward, swallowed by the same swamps he once hunted through. Some said the dog still roamed out there, half wild and silent. Others whispered that Esther, if she still lived, had finally called them home. Amelia never asked. Some questions were better left to the dark. 5 years later, the land was unrecognizable. The cotton fields had been replanted with corn and vegetables. The quarters had become homes with porches and painted shutters. Children's laughter replaced the crack of the whip. New Hope and Thornhill together formed a single community, a symbol of what freedom could look like when people refused to forget. Amelia stood at the edge of a field one evening, the sunset bleeding gold across the sky. Beside her, Ruth leaned on her cane, smiling faintly. "You remember that night you ran?" Ruth asked. "I remember every step. You thought you were running for yourself. Turns out, you were running for all of us." Amelia looked out over the land that had taken so much and was finally giving something back. "I didn't know I could do that." "You didn't have to know," Ruth said. "You just had to move." In the small schoolhouse at the center of the settlement, Amelia began to teach. She taught letters and numbers, but also stories, real ones. She told the children about Ruth and Samuel, about the marshal, about Esther, about the truth that had lived in silence for 30 years. One day, a little girl raised her hand. "Miss Amelia," she asked, "is it true you ran from dogs?" Amelia smiled. "It's true. Were you scared?" She knelt so her eyes met the child's. "I was terrified. But being scared don't mean you can't be brave. It just means you got something worth fighting for." The little girl nodded, eyes wide. "Did you win?" Amelia looked around the room, the walls painted bright yellow, the sound of laughter spilling from outside, the sunlight pouring through the window. "Yes," she said softly, "we did." That night, as the stars rose over New Hope, Amelia sat on her porch with a book in her lap. The cicadas sang, the wind carried the smell of tilled soil, and somewhere in the distance she could hear a lullaby Ruth was humming. The world was still broken in many places, but here, on this small patch of earth, something whole had taken root. Freedom, she thought, isn't a gift. It's a fight you keep winning, one day at a time. And as the night deepened, she whispered to the dark, to Esther, to Ruth, to every soul who never saw this dawn. I remember you. The wind stirred the trees in answer, soft as breath. Years passed, but the land never forgot the sound of chains being broken. Where Thornhill once stood, rows of young oak trees now shaded the graves of the unknown men, women, and children who had lived and died believing freedom was a myth. Their names were carved into stone by trembling hands, not as decoration but as a promise. Amelia visited often. Sometimes she came with Ruth, sometimes with Marcus and his young son. Sometimes she came alone, sitting in the tall grass until dusk, tracing the names she could barely read. She was 17 now, taller, stronger, her eyes no longer wide with fear, but sharpened by knowing. Her scars on her feet, on her back, inside her heart had faded, but they never disappeared. She didn't want them to. They were proof. Every Sunday, she taught in the same small schoolhouse she had helped build, paint chipped, sunlight spilling through the cracks in the roof, the air thick with chalk dust and laughter. Children crowded the benches, wide-eyed and eager, whispering stories of heroes they were only beginning to believe in. "Miss Amelia," one boy said one morning, his hands shooting up, "my daddy says you beat the master with just your feet and God on your side. Is that true?" Amelia smiled softly. "No, child," she said. "It wasn't just me, it was truth. And truth walks faster than any man can run." The class giggled, but her eyes were serious. She turned toward the blackboard, where she'd written 3 words in chalk. Asterisk, asterisk, never forget freedom. Asterisk, asterisk. Below it, smaller letters. Asterisk, asterisk, freedom isn't given, it's taken. Asterisk, asterisk. In the evenings, new hope came alive. Lanterns glowed in every window. The smell of bread, earth, and tobacco filled the air. The laughter of children blended with the low hum of adults, sharing stories on porches. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still flared, harvests still failed, and the world outside still sneered at the idea of free black families owning their own land, but it was theirs. That made all the difference. Marcus worked as the town carpenter now, his hands shaping wood the way a preacher shapes words carefully, reverently. He had married a woman named Clara, and their son was just learning to walk. Sometimes, when the boy toddled across the porch, Marcus would laugh and look toward Amelia. "You know," he'd say, "if that marshal hadn't listened, none of this would have happened." Amelia would shake her head. "If Esther hadn't hidden me, if Ruth hadn't told me the truth, if you hadn't believed me, none of this would have happened." Marcus grinned. "Guess freedom don't come from one person. It comes from a chain of them." She nodded. "The only chain that's worth keeping." One autumn, a letter arrived. It came from Jackson, sealed with a federal stamp. Samuel read it aloud to the gathered townsfolk in front of the old courthouse they'd rebuilt into a meeting hall. The letter announced the asterisk, asterisk, Thornhill decision, asterisk, asterisk, a legal declaration affirming that every person freed from that plantation and their descendants held lawful ownership of the land. It was the first ruling of its kind in the county's history. When Samuel finished reading, the crowd erupted cheers, tears, laughter, all at once. The sound rolled across the fields like thunder after a long drought. Amelia stood in the back, watching. Ruth leaned against her cane, whispering, "You see, child, the law can forget, but God don't." Amelia smiled. Maybe they finally met halfway. That night, she walked alone to the edge of the swamp where she had nearly died years before. The air was heavy with the scent of water and pine. The moon floated silver in the dark water. She knelt by the bank and whispered, "I made it, Esther." The swamp answered in small ways, the ripple of water, the flicker of fireflies, the soft rustle of unseen things moving. She took a small pouch from her pocket, a piece of Esther's old cloth that she'd found years ago in the ruins of the cabin. Inside were crushed herbs and a single small coin. She buried it in the mud. "For all who ran and never reached the light," she said quietly, "you're free now too." The years rolled on. Samuel grew old. Ruth's laughter turned softer but never vanished. Marcus's boy grew into a young man who could build a house with nothing but faith and lumber. And Amelia kept teaching. Sometimes, new travelers arrived, freedmen from distant towns, or orphans of war, or even poor white families who'd lost everything. Amelia always greeted them the same way. "You're home now, but freedom comes with work." When asked why she never left for the cities up north, she would smile and point toward the horizon where Thornhill's fields once burned under the Sunday. "Because this place remembers," she'd say, "and memory's the first kind of freedom." One summer evening, after her last class, a young girl lingered as the others left. She had big, curious eyes and a voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Amelia," she asked, "how did you keep running that night? Weren't you scared?" Amelia smiled, kneeling so their eyes met. "Of course I was scared, but fear's a teacher. It tells you what matters." The girl frowned. "Then what did it teach you?" Amelia looked toward the window, where the dying light painted the fields gold. "That even a 12-year-old can change the world, if she just refuses to believe the lie." The girl's face lit up, her small hand reaching for Amelia's. "Then I won't believe it either." Amelia squeezed her hand gently. "Good. Then keep running toward the light, no matter who tries to turn you around." That night, as the sky deepened into velvet blue, Amelia sat on her porch again. The stars blinked faintly through the haze, and the cicadas began their long, familiar song. She held the marshal's old book in her hands, its spine cracked and worn, its pages smelling faintly of smoke and history. Inside the cover, she had written her own words beneath his. Asterisk, "Truth is the only weapon they can't take from you." Asterisk. She closed the book and looked out across the land. The fields swayed gently in the wind, carrying the sound of laughter, hammers, and the hum of a new day being built. She thought of Esther's cabin, of Marcus's courage, of Ruth's trembling hands planting seeds in the dirt. She thought of the countless names no one would ever know, and she whispered, almost to herself, "We are still running, but this time, not from darkness. We're running toward tomorrow." The wind stirred the trees, carrying her words away into the night. And somewhere, in the quiet between heartbeats, the earth seemed to answer, "Run free.